My name is Perpetua Waidera. I'm a social scientist. Today, I would like us to speak about loss and grief. So what is grief? Grief is an intense emotional response that you experience when you have lost a loved one or when you have lost something that was important to you. You can actually experience grief when you lose, like, for example, a job. You can experience grief when you lose your home. You can experience grief when you lose a possession that was prized to you. Maybe you even lose your car. You can also experience grief when you lose a health status. Like, for example, when you go to a doctor and you're told that you now have maybe a life-threatening condition, or you have lost maybe your eyesight, you can also experience grief. And you will go through the stages of grief, although many people think that the only people who grieve are the ones who have lost someone to death. In fact, even divorce and separation can make you go through the grieving process. When you're grieving, you have intense feelings of sadness, and sometimes, especially immediately after you get the news, you will feel shock, and sometimes you can even go into denial. And grief has several symptoms also. Sometimes it looks like depression, where you feel like you don't have energy. Sometimes you feel like you have a stomach upset or a stomach ache. Sometimes you can even have a headache. You might feel like you're fatigued. You might also feel very irritable. You snap and you get angry very easily, especially the period following your loss. There are actually stages of grief also. According to Kubler-Ross, a psychologist, she said that there are 5 stages of grief. So, but those stages, they don't go concurrently. The stages can occur in any order. So one of the stages is denial, and especially immediately after the loss has happened. So you find it very difficult to accept that you have experienced the loss. And you might find someone someone who's in denial might actually continue to behave as if the loss did not happen. Another stage is bargaining. Sometimes when you're anticipating grief, or you're anticipating loss, or the loss is about to happen, you might start to bargain. You might start to say, oh, if I do this and this, the loss will not happen. If I do this and this, I don't have to go through the grieving experience. Sometimes people get spiritual and they say, oh, if I get saved, or if I behave well, the loss will not happen and I don't have to go through the grieving process. So bargaining is another stage. Then another stage is anger. Sometimes you might find that you're angry. If you lost maybe someone in hospital, you might be angry towards the doctors, like, oh, those doctors, they were negligent. Or the nurse, I kept telling the nurse to do this and they didn't do that. So you become angry at the medical personnel or the caregivers. Maybe the person was at home and someone else was taking care of them. And you say, no, this caregiver, they were not doing a good job. That's why so-and-so died. Sometimes you're angry at God. You're like, oh, I prayed so much. I prayed and this person still died. Why did God take away this person from me? Why did he take this person away, even if the person was so good, or we tried our best to save this person and the person still died? So sometimes you might find yourself getting very angry at God and also even questioning your faith. Another stage is depression. Depression comes with sadness, loss of interest in the things that you were previously interested in. And you might feel intense sadness for long moments of time. Sometimes it can even stretch into weeks. Okay. And then another stage is acceptance. Okay. When you accept is when you actually realize, you know what, the loss happened and I need to live. I need to learn how to live with the loss. This usually comes later. Sometimes I say that the stages don't go concurrently. One day you might wake up and you're feeling very angry. Then later on, you're feeling like you're sad, so you're depressed. And then later on, you might find yourself bargaining, And then sometimes you might even go back to denial. You're like, no, this thing actually did not happen. And then sometimes you find that you have gotten to acceptance, you accept, and then the next moment, you're feeling angry again. So sometimes the grief comes in waves, a wave of anger, a wave of depression, and it might take some time before you actually reach acceptance and settle on acceptance in the long run. Sometimes when someone is grieving, they might feel very overwhelmed with the events, overwhelmed with thoughts, overwhelmed with emotions. And sometimes some people even get numb. Yeah, so you might either be overwhelmed or sometimes you might get numbed. The other surprising emotions that you may feel are emotions such as guilt. You might feel guilty like, oh, did I really do my best to save the situation? Did I really do my best to help this person? Did I really do my best maybe to save my job before I lost it? So you might actually have feelings of guilt. And sometimes also, if you are taking care of someone who was sick for a very, very long time, as a caregiver, that can be very, very draining on you. Sometimes you might have the surprising feeling of the relief that you no longer have to do that caregiving job. So you're feeling like, oh, I don't need to do all these things I was doing for this person. But at the same time, the person who's died was someone who was loved by you. So you might feel like, how can I feel relief? And yet this person has died. And yet at the same time, I'm feeling sad. So when you're grieving, you might even have conflicting feelings, relief and sadness. That feeling of emptiness that you get when you have lost something that's precious to you or someone that is precious to you. Sometimes we had talked about that you can also feel anger. If you are deeply religious and you find yourself feeling angry towards God, you might also have this other feeling of, how can I feel anger against God and yet, I really believe him and I trust him and I've been a believer or I've been a Christian or I've been in this religion for this long time. I've always trusted God, but then I'm angry at him. So you might actually have conflicting thoughts and conflicting emotions after a loss. Sometimes when we lose a loved one, we might dream about that person. Many people report about dreaming about a loved one who died. And sometimes in the dream, you feel the presence of that person. And sometimes you hear the voice of that person. Sometimes you spend time doing something with that person. Or sometimes the person communicates something to you. Or sometimes you're the one who is telling the person a story. So dreaming about someone who died it is normal and it happens to everybody. It is just that at that point, when you lose someone, you're trying to find meaning in it. You're trying to find out, so why did this person die? What is the meaning of all this? And sometimes those questions might come through your subconscious mind, and sometimes it comes in the form of dreams. So we have different types of grief, and sometimes loss occurs suddenly, especially maybe the loss of a loved one. It can occur suddenly. You might find that maybe the person had a heart attack or they were involved in an accident. Basically, no one was expecting the loss to happen. And when the loss happens suddenly, you might find that the loved ones are left with so many questions. It usually comes as a shock. And you might actually even go into denial at this point because you're like, wait, I was just talking to this person. I saw this person yesterday. We had even planned to meet with this person and now they are no more. So it can really complicate the grief, especially because you might have unresolved issues. Maybe there was even a disagreement with the person who passed. Or maybe the last time you spoke to this person, maybe you were rude to them or you denied them something, there's a misunderstanding. And then if the person is very close to you, when they die, you might be left with that feeling of guilt, like, oh my God, I didn't know that was the last time I was going to see this person. I feel so bad because these are the last words I spoke to this person, or these are the last words this person spoke to me. I wish I had spoken differently. I wish the ending, or I wish our last meeting with this person was better, was friendlier. Sometimes when a person dies suddenly and there are things you hadn't told them, maybe there was need to forgive. So you didn't reconcile with this person. You had been telling yourself, I need to reconcile with so and so because of X, Y, Z. But then the person dies and you're left literally holding your apology in your hands. You're not able to share that apology with the person. Sometimes maybe the person died and you never told them how much you loved them. You never told them how much you appreciate them. And this might leave you feeling guilty, and you might have regrets regarding this sudden loss of the person. And sometimes you might have anticipated loss or anticipated grief. Maybe a person was sick for a very long time and you have been taking care of them. You've already gotten reports from the doctor. You can also observe for yourself that this person, their health is deteriorating. Maybe even the person already communicated directly or indirectly that they might not be around for a long time. So you find yourself already resolving things with them. It gives an opportunity for the family and this person to plan, even to plan for their death, to plan for what will happen after the loss. And it gives the family and loved ones an opportunity to also deal with their emotions, knowing that this person they love so much may not be there in the near future. So when the person, so you find that anticipated grief is you start grieving even before the person dies, because every day you're seeing, oh, the person is not getting better, they're getting worse. You start feeling sad in advance. So anticipated grief is grief that happens when you're expecting the loss and after. And then, of course, when the loss happens, then you go into the grieving process. When you go into the grieving process after an anticipatory grief, it is called, you might go into what we call abbreviated grief. Abbreviated grief is grief that takes a short time. Because, for example, if you're taking care of your grandmother, they were very elderly, they were sickly towards the end, you had already kind of made peace with the fact that they will not be around for long. When they finally pass, it will be surprising. You know, sometimes you think that you'll be ready for the death, but every time death happens, even if you're expecting it, the finality of it is always very shocking. So the loss happens, the person dies, and maybe you go through the process of burying them, the burial process, the ceremony. You might find that your grieving process may not take as long and it may not be as complicated as a loss that happened suddenly. So that is what you call abbreviated grief. If you have experienced abbreviated grief, you anticipated the grief, so you were sad for a very long time, the loss happened, and then the person died, and then you find yourself that you're not grieving for too long. You might feel guilty, like, oh my gosh, why am I not so sad and so died? It is normal to have an abbreviated grief, a short grieving period after having anticipatory grief, because already you had made peace and you had already gone through your emotions. So don't feel guilty about not grieving for too long. Another type of grief that can happen is delayed grief. Maybe someone died and it's someone who was close to you, and you find yourself immersed in the ceremony, in the burial, in the preparations, and everything else that will come with that loss. So you might find that you're focusing so much on doing, on arranging, on planning things that you don't have time for emotions. You wake up early in the morning, you hit the road running, you sleep very late, sometimes you don't even sleep. So you might find that it hits you, the loss and the reality of the loss hits you weeks or even months after. So that is what you call delayed grief. And if you have delayed grief, it's good to look for support so that you can be able to grieve the person that you lost properly. The other kind of grief that can happen is cumulative grief. Cumulative grief. Cumulative grief happens when you've had grief, you've had different losses either happening at the same time or in quick succession. So sometimes you might find that, oh, maybe you lost a loved one and then another loved one also died within weeks of the other one, or maybe they died together. So you find that you're grieving different things or different people at the same time. So that is what you call cumulative grief, and it can be quite overwhelming. Sometimes you don't know who to grieve. Do you grieve this one? Do you grieve this one? You know, and then we have collective grief. Collective grief is what happens when a group of people or a community are grieving something. This happens when you've had things like war, natural disasters, or or a group of people in that community or that family died at the same time. So it becomes this story. It becomes a story of loss for the community. It becomes a story of loss for a large group of people. So that is what you call collective grief. You might find yourself grieving because something has happened in your community that doesn't touch you directly. And then you find yourself asking, but why is this thing affecting me so much? And yet I don't even know the people who died. It is because you're experiencing collective grief. The people around you are grieving, and therefore you're grieving together. It happens, like for example, if you have a road accident and the people who die in that road accident are from the same community, you'll find that the whole of that community will actually go through some kind of a mourning process, some kind of a grieving process. Another type of grief is complicated grief. This is when you find yourself grieving for an extended period of time. The grieving process is prolonged. When you have complicated grief or prolonged grief, you might find yourself unable to go back to your everyday activities. You might find yourself being obsessed with thoughts of the person that you lost for a very, very long time. You might find yourself also fixated on the past, that, oh, if so-and-so was here, we used to do this with so-and-so. Although those thoughts are normal and even healthy to have, if they go on for too long, it means that you might be having complicated grief. What is it that would make you have complicated grief? Sometimes when you have a sudden loss, like for example, the loss was unexpected, that might complicate your grieving process. Also, sometimes when a loss does not make sense. For example, if you lose a child, you might find yourself wondering, surely, how did I lose? How is it that I'm the one who is burying my child? Yeah, my children were supposed to bury me, not me burying my child. And especially if maybe the child who has died is probably a small baby, it might not make sense to you why you had to go through that type of loss. And sometimes you might be grieving something or someone that people don't know about. If you're pregnant and you lose your pregnancy and you had really wanted that baby, when you lose a pregnancy, people will support you for a couple of days and then they'll move on because they never met the baby, they never saw the baby. So for them, you just lost a pregnancy. But for you, you had bonded with the baby was kicking in your stomach. If you're the dad of the baby, you were expecting your son, you're expecting your daughter. So you might find yourself having to go through a normal grieving process of maybe months or even years. But other people will not understand that grief because they never really saw the baby that you lost. Sometimes you might be grieving someone that people don't know you loved. For example, if you loved someone secretly and the person dies, so you're not supposed to show that you're grieving because people don't know that that person was very close to you. You might find yourself going through complicated grief because you didn't give yourself time to grieve. You probably went for the funeral, then the next day you had to wake up, dress up and go to work and act like everything was normal, and yet maybe the person who died was a person who was extremely dear to you. So losing things or people that are invisible to others, it might complicate the grief because it means other people are not able to support us in like they would support us during a normal loss of maybe if people know you've lost a parent, then they'll be there for you. You'll get the support that you need. So you have experienced the loss and you're going through grief. Okay, so how do you cope? Allow yourself to grieve. Okay, don't think that grieving is a sign of helplessness. When you lose something, you need to give yourself time to grieve. And it may mean expressing your emotions. If you need to cry, cry. They say men don't cry. Even if you're a man, find your space and cry. Cry it out. Sit in your emotions. Sometimes take some time to be alone so that you can feel your feelings. So that you can know, oh, I'm feeling angry today. I'm feeling very sad today. I'm feeling empty. I I feel like I should have done XYZ to prevent that death or that loss. Sit in your feelings and process the feelings, because when you process your emotions, then you will be able to grieve in a healthy way, and your grief will not turn into complicated grief. Also, if you're grieving, please reach out for help. Ask for help. Ask for help from your friends. Ask for help from maybe someone who's gone through a similar loss. You can also reach out for help from a professional. Also, it's good for you when you're grieving to stay connected to your social circle. If there are people who are there supporting you, your friends, your relatives, maybe the family members also who lost the same person, it might be tempting for you to seclude yourself because maybe you're overwhelmed. Resist the temptation of secluding yourself and stay connected. Stay connected to people who can hold your hand, people who can sit with you, and people who can also provide you with practical support. When you're grieving, you've had a loss, anniversaries can trigger intense feelings. Maybe it is that person's birthday, maybe it is the anniversary of the day you met, probably it's the marriage anniversary, the wedding anniversary. It could also be the anniversary of the day the person was buried, or the anniversary of the day that the person died. You might find that maybe it's 2 years, 3 years later, when a particular date arrives, you feel like you're again overwhelmed with intense emotions. It is normal to feel like this. The important thing is to acknowledge and to remember that it is normal to have intense feelings of grief around anniversaries, around key dates. And when this happens, you might maybe do something. Maybe you can light a candle, create a memory about that person, and the feeling will soon pass. It will not persist like the first time when you lost the person. The feeling might be intense, but it may not be persistent. You might feel like, you might find that a day or two later, you are actually feeling a little bit more like yourself. Also, when you're grieving, take it one day at a time. Sometimes when it's overwhelming, take it even one moment at a time. 1 moment at a time, 1 minute at a time, 1 day at a time. And then create a schedule of events, like when you wake up, when you do certain activities. Because when you take it one day at a time and you have a schedule of daily activities, then you'll be able to get back your life. You'll be able to, you're not going to lose like for example, your job and your other responsibilities because you have been paralyzed by grief. Take it one day at a time. And you'll find that with time, you'll be able to regain your life, and you'll be able to also learn how to live without the person that you lost. Because grieving is not about forgetting the person. It's about accepting that the loss happened, accepting the person is no longer there, and then learning to live without that person. Sometimes when you lose a loved one, you might be so overwhelmed with emotions and feelings that you're not able to handle. And you might be tempted to manage those feelings by, for example, using alcohol, using addictive substances so that you can alter your mood. When you use alcohol or addictive substances, like weed, so that you don't feel so bad, the risk of this is that you might learn actually to use these substances every time you're feeling uncomfortable. The thing about life is you cannot totally get rid of stressors. Yeah, there will always be something stressing you. Once in a while, you will encounter loss and grief. So if every time you feel distressed, you feel anxious, you feel very sad, you're feeling angry, you have these emotions that you don't know how to handle. If every time you're reaching for that bottle, reaching for the pill, reaching for that puff, you might find that you can easily get addicted to these substances, because then your brain will learn, oh, we are sad, we need to drink. We are sad, we need to take a puff. We are sad, we need to take this pill. And you will become dependent on those substances, and that will just only complicate your life. Remember, when you're grieving is a process. It might take time, but if you have a healthy grieving process, you will get better little by little, day by day. So try your best not to succumb to the temptation of treating discomfort, emotional discomfort, by using addictive substances. Do other things. Go for a walk, talk to a friend, go to a counseling session, sing, pray, read the Bible, go to the gym, sit quietly in nature. Do whatever it is that you can do to calm yourself down, but kindly use healthy coping mechanisms, not unhealthy coping mechanisms like taking alcohol. So when do you seek for help? When do you reach out for help during the grieving process? When you feel that you're unable to go back to your life. The loss happened weeks ago, months ago, you're not able to sleep, you have insomnia, even when you go to work, you're not able to focus. You have even lost interest in, self-care activities. It looks like you have gone into depression. You're completely paralyzed. You're not even able to socialize. You're avoiding people for weeks and weeks or months and months. You also have changes in appetite. Either you're eating a lot, or you're not eating at all, meaning that your health will start to be affected. When you have very intense anger, very intense sadness, very intense numbness or anxiety, weeks and months after you have encountered the loss, that means that you may need to reach out for professional help. And also, when you start experiencing thoughts of harming yourself, when you start thinking, I think maybe, when you start thinking that you have also lost interest in your own life, when you start having suicide ideations and thoughts of suicide, then you definitely need to seek for help, because it means that the grief has become complicated and is probably turned into depression. So maybe you're not the one who has encountered the loss, and you're not the one who's grieving, but someone close to you, a friend, a colleague, or a family member is going through the grieving process. How do you help someone who is grieving? The first thing is be available. Be available. You can reach out to the person, indicate your availability. Say, I'm here to help. How can I help you? Sometimes they may not even know what to tell you. Sometimes they may tell you a specific thing in where you can help them, and sometimes they may not even know what to tell you because they're overwhelmed. Be there. Go visit them. Even if it means just sitting with them, sit with them. Sometimes when someone is grieving, we don't know what to say to them, and it is completely normal. Sometimes sitting with them in silence is just enough. Also, if you're just talking, don't be afraid of saying the name of the person who died, because sometimes you could be with the person and then you're afraid of mentioning the name of the person who died because you think that it will cost them more heartache. It is okay. If you're talking about a story of the person who died, it is okay for you to mention their names, because sometimes it is reassuring for the person who is grieving to hear someone else mentioning the name of their loved one, the person who died. If they need to talk, listen to them. Okay, just listen. Listening is enough. And try not to give advice, especially cliches. Oh, God will give you another child. No, those are cliches, because you don't know. The person wants the child. The child who died is the one they want. They don't want another child. So when you say something like that, it doesn't make sense to them. They want the one who went. Of course, they can't have the one who went, but let's try not to say things that are cliche. Just listen. Listen to the person. Listen to and if they want to cry, let them cry. Don't say don't cry. Don't tell them things like don't cry. If they express anger, allow them to express anger. Don't judge their anger. If they're expressing guilt, whatever emotion that they're expressing, allow them to express their emotions. Just sit there with them. You can also do something with them. You can also take them places. Maybe they're supposed to go and look for a coffin, or they're supposed to go to a certain meeting. Be there with them. Attend the meeting with them. Provide them with practical help. Maybe if they have visitors, you can help cooking the tea, serving, you can also help them to entertain the visitors, because maybe the person who is bereaved, the person who is grieving may be too numb to talk. Yeah. So give them practical help, and also be aware that grieving is a process. It takes time. So don't go to support a grieving person and give them a timeline. Like say, oh, in 3 days they need to be ready. They need to be back to normal. No. Sometimes it can even take 2 years. Some people grieve for 6 months, some other people grieve for 2 years. So if you go to someone who is grieving, maybe you've gone there a few months later and you find they're still crying, let them cry. Okay, and grieving is different for different people. One person will still be crying 6 months later or 2 years later, and another person will stop crying after even 2 weeks. They'll have cried all their tears. So grieving is different for different people. Don't rush the grieving process. Allow the person to express their emotions and their feelings. Let them ask their questions. Sometimes they have questions. They're not asking you so that you answer the questions. No one expects you to have the answers. Like, for example, someone who is grieving might ask you, why did God take so and so? Obviously, you don't have the answer. You can just sit with the person as they ask the questions. It's a normal process of grieving. And you can also do something together. I had talked about that. And then I know sometimes people talk about moving on after someone has died. Is it really possible to move on after someone has died? I think that it is not moving on, but it is because life is moving on, you move on with life. You learn how to live without this person, okay? The sadness may stay for a while. The memories of that person will stay with you for a very long time. Sometimes you will have your moments of crying, of sadness, of regret as you go on. The moments of sadness, they will reduce with time, but they will be there. They might be triggered in the anniversaries. You might even find on the 5th anniversary, you still have a few tears to shed because you're grieving that person. It gets better with time, yeah? But I think the thing is, you accept that you need to now learn to live without a person. You find out, how is life like without this person? And you might find that the more you live your life and the more you create more memories, your life you'll find a new normal for your life. It will not be the same, but it will be a new normal for you. And one day you'll find that you're able to laugh, you're able to make jokes, you're even able to remember the person that you lost and laugh maybe at something funny. You might remember them with nostalgia, with maybe happiness. You might even find yourself telling happy stories about the person that you lost after you have gone through the grieving process. If you're grieving, remember that it might be intense right now. It might be overwhelming right now, but with time and with the right kind of support, it will get better and better, a little bit every day. Thank you for watching this video. If you liked it, please subscribe so that you can see similar videos on mental health. And if you have a friend who would benefit from this information, please share the video with them. Thank you very much.